The saloon's amber glow flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting long shadows across the warped wooden floor where Lila's boots scraped in a rhythm that wasn't hers. Her crimson dress, frayed at the hem, swirled as she danced, her body bending to the tinny piano notes that clung to the smoke-heavy air. Men leered from their tables, their whiskey-glazed eyes hungry for something she'd never give, but it was the man in the back, the one with the tailored coat and the shadow of a Stetson, who held her gaze. He was Clayton Reed, the richest rancher in Dustwood, a man whose wealth could buy the town twice over, yet here he sat, watching her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. Lila danced for debt, for the ledger that chained her to this saloon, but tonight, something in Clayton's eyes promised a different kind of debt, one that gold couldn't settle. Her every step felt like a confession, her every twirl a plea, and as the music swelled, she wondered if the man who owned half the valley could see the heart she was too broken to offer. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of a single moment to change a life, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts for more tales that touch the soul. Your support keeps these stories alive. Lila had come to Dustwood 3 years ago, a runaway from a life she never spoke of, her past a tangle of pain she buried beneath a practiced smile. The saloon's owner, Amos, had found her shivering in an alley, her dress torn and her dreams shattered. He'd offered her a deal: dance for his patrons, draw in the crowds, and he'd erase the debt she owed for the room, the food, the life he claimed he'd saved. But the ledger never shrank. Every night, as she spun across the stage, her debt seemed to grow, a cruel arithmetic that kept her tethered to the saloon's creaking boards. Her body moved with grace, but her soul felt like it was unraveling, each step a reminder of the freedom she'd lost. The other girls whispered of escape, of men who'd pay for their freedom, but Lila knew better. Men like these didn't free you, they owned you in a different way. She'd seen it in their eyes, the way they measured her worth in coin or conquest. Yet, Clayton Reed was different. He didn't holler or throw coins at her feet. He watched, silent, his presence heavy with something she couldn't name. It unnerved her, the way his gaze seemed to see past her painted smile to the girl she'd buried long ago. The saloon was a world of its own, a microcosm of Dustwood's grit and greed. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer, tobacco, and desperation. Miners, drifters, and ranch hands crowded the tables, their laughter sharp and fleeting, their hands quick to grab what wasn't theirs. Lila had learned to dodge their advances, to laugh off their crude offers, but it chipped away at her. Each night, she'd retreat to the small room above the saloon, where the walls were thin and the mattress sagged, and she'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was all her life would be. She'd dream of a place where the wind didn't carry dust, where the sky was wide enough to hold her hopes. But dreams were dangerous in Dustwood. They made the mornings harder, the nights longer. Her only solace was the locket she wore, hidden beneath her dress, a tarnished silver heart that held a faded photograph of her mother, the only piece of her past she hadn't let go. It was her anchor, a reminder that she'd once been loved, that she'd once been more than a saloon girl dancing for debt. Clayton Reed was a mystery wrapped in wealth and solitude. The townsfolk spoke of him in hushed tones, their stories a mix of awe and envy. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, a sprawling empire of cattle and land that stretched beyond the horizon. His name was on every deed, every contract, yet he carried himself with a quiet that bordered on sorrow. Lila had heard the rumors: a wife lost to fever, a child who never drew breath, a man who built his fortune to outrun his grief. He came to the saloon rarely, always sitting alone, his eyes fixed on the stage as if searching for something he'd lost. Lila felt it, the weight of his gaze, like a hand reaching for something she didn't know she could give. She'd catch herself wondering about him, about the man behind the money, but she'd push the thoughts away. Men like Clayton didn't save girls like her, they bought them, or they broke them. Still, each night he returned, his presence stirred something in her, a flicker of hope she didn't dare trust. The turning point came on a night when the wind howled outside, rattling the saloon's windows like a warning. Lila was dancing, her movements mechanical, her mind drifting to the locket pressed against her chest. The crowd was rowdier than usual, their shouts drowning out the piano, their hands reaching for her as she passed. She faltered, her foot catching on a loose board, and for a moment, she thought she'd fall. The room spun, the faces blurring into a sea of mockery, and then she saw him, Clayton, standing, his chair scraping back, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak, but his presence was a lifeline. She steadied herself, her heart pounding, and finished the dance, her steps fiercer, as if she were dancing for him alone. When the music stopped, the crowd roared, but Clayton was gone, his table empty. Lila felt a pang of loss she couldn't explain, an ache that lingered long after she'd retreated to her room. The next night, he was back, but this time, he waited. As the saloon emptied, Amos called Lila to the bar, his grin sharp as a blade. Clayton stood there, his hat in his hands, his eyes steady but unreadable. Amos spoke first, his voice oily with greed. He said Clayton had made an offer, not for her body, but for her debt. He'd pay it all, every cent, if she'd agree to work at his ranch. Not as a dancer, but as a housekeeper, a cook, a woman with a purpose beyond the stage. Lila's heart raced, her mind a storm of fear and hope. Freedom was a word she'd stopped believing in, but here it was, offered by a man whose motives she couldn't trust. She wanted to ask why, to demand what he expected in return, but her voice failed her. Instead, she nodded, and Amos laughed, already counting the gold. As she followed Clayton into the night, the locket felt heavier, as if her mother's memory was warning her, or urging her forward. The ranch was a world apart from the saloon, a sprawling oasis of green fields and endless sky. The house was grand but worn, its rooms filled with echoes of a life Clayton no longer lived. Lila's days were filled with work, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, tending to the garden, but it was work that felt honest, work that didn't demand her soul. Clayton was kind but distant, his words few, his smiles rare. He'd watch her sometimes, not with hunger, but with a quiet curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Lila kept her guard up, waiting for the catch, for the moment he'd reveal the price of her freedom. But it never came. Instead, he gave her space, a room of her own, a wage she could keep. Slowly, the walls she'd built began to crack. She'd catch herself humming as she worked, feeling the sun on her face, marveling at the way the ranch seemed to breathe with life. Yet, the weight of her past lingered, a shadow she couldn't outrun. The suspense built in small moments, in the glances they shared over coffee, in the way his hand brushed hers when he passed her a tool. Lila began to notice the man beneath the wealth, the calluses on his hands, the lines etched by grief, the way he spoke of his land with a love that bordered on sacred. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sky painted with the colors of dusk, he told her about his wife, Eliza, and the child they'd lost. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, glistening with a pain that mirrored her own. Lila wanted to tell him about her mother, about the locket, about the girl she'd been before Dustwood, but fear held her back. What could she offer a man who had everything? Yet, as the days turned to weeks, she felt something shift, a connection that grew in the quiet spaces between them. She began to dance again, not for debt, but for herself, twirling in the fields when she thought no one was watching, her movements a prayer for the life she was beginning to believe in. The climax came unexpectedly, on a night when a storm rolled in, the kind that made the earth tremble. Lila was in the kitchen when she heard a crash, the sound of breaking glass and a cry that wasn't human. She ran to the barn, where Clayton was struggling to calm a spooked horse, its hooves thrashing as lightning split the sky. Without thinking, Lila grabbed a rope, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Together, they calmed the animal, their movements synchronized, their trust unspoken. When it was over, they stood in the rain, breathless, soaked, and alive. Clayton looked at her, his eyes raw with something deeper than gratitude. He reached for her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. In that moment, she understood what he'd seen in her that first night in the saloon, not a dancer, not a debtor, but a woman with a heart as fierce as his own. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. Lila began to share her story, piece by piece, the locket no longer a secret but a bridge between them. Clayton listened, his silence a gift, his presence a promise. He didn't ask for her love, but she gave it anyway, not because of his wealth, but because of the man he was, the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd given her a chance when she'd forgotten how to hope. Their bond wasn't built on gold, but on the small, sacred moments they shared, a laugh over a burned supper, a walk through the fields, a dance under the stars that felt like a vow. Lila's debt to the saloon was gone, but the debt she felt to Clayton was deeper, a debt of the heart that she'd spend her life repaying, not with coin, but with the love she'd thought she'd lost. As the story of Lila and Clayton spread through Dustwood, it became a legend, a tale of redemption whispered in saloons and churches alike. Lila no longer danced for debt, but for Joy, her movements a celebration of the life she'd reclaimed. Clayton's ranch became a haven, not just for cattle, but for lost souls seeking a second chance. Together, they built something that gold couldn't buy, a home, a family, a love that outlasted the dust and the storms. Lila's locket, once a tether to her past, became a symbol of her future, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could find a way. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the beauty of second chances, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts. Your support means the world to us and keeps these stories alive for others to find. Before we end, please leave a comment below, share what this story meant to you, or tell us about a moment in your life when someone gave you a second chance. Your words could inspire someone else, just as Lila and Clayton's story has inspired us all.